There is a specific sound a silver spoon makes against fine china when a room has gone completely, deathly silent. It's a sharp, high-pitched ping that echoes like a gunshot when no one is breathing. I heard that sound the moment my mother-in-law, Vivian, placed her spoon down, wiped the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin, and looked directly into my eyes across the candlelight. "It's a shame, really," she said, her voice smooth as polished glass, but cold enough to freeze water, "that Julian has to work so hard to maintain the lifestyle to which some of us have become accustomed. But I suppose when one comes from nothing, the appetite for everything is insatiable." The 20 other guests at the table, cousins, business partners, old family friends, stopped eating. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the kind of secondhand embarrassment that makes your skin prickle. Beside me, my husband Julian stiffened. I felt his leg twitch under the table, a nervous reflex I had learned to recognize over the last 2 years. He started to open his mouth to defend me, but the fear of his mother shut his throat before the words could come out. I didn't look down. I didn't blush. I didn't cry. I looked around the room at the mahogany paneling, the oil paintings of their ancestors lining the walls, the heavy velvet curtains meant to keep the world out. They looked at me with pity, some with disgust. To them, I was Elena, the charity worker. Elena, the girl with the off-brand purse. Elena, the gold digger who had trapped the heir to the sterling shipping empire. Vivian smiled, a tight, predatory expression. She thought she had me cornered. She thought she was putting a stray dog in its place. She had no idea that the phone in my pocket had just vibrated with a confirmation email. She had no idea that the nothing I came from was a fortress built of steel and silence. And she certainly didn't know that the roof over her head, the company her husband ran, and the debt they were drowning in, now belonged to me. I picked up my wine glass, took a slow sip, and smiled back. "You're right, Vivian," I said softly. "Appetites can be dangerous things. But before I tell you how that dinner ended, and how the Sterling dynasty came crashing down in the span of a dessert course, I have to tell you how I ended up at that table in the first place. Normal life/setup. I met Julian 2 years ago on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was working at a small community center in the city, organizing a coat drive. It wasn't a job I did for the money, obviously. My salary barely covered the gas for my old Honda Civic. I did it because my father had taught me that wealth is a tool but service is a duty. "Elena," my father used to say, sitting in his worn leather armchair in our library, "never let the world know what you hold in your hand. Let them judge you by what you carry in your heart. My family is private. We are the people who own the companies that own the companies you've heard of. We don't do galas. We don't do magazine covers. We value anonymity above all else. When I moved to the city, I used my mother's maiden name. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment with creaky floorboards and a radiator that hissed all night. I wanted to be known for me, not for the 11-figure portfolio attached to my birth certificate." Julian walked into the community center wearing a raincoat that cost more than my car and holding a box of donations. He looked out of place, too polished, too clean. But his eyes were kind. He didn't hand the box to an assistant. He carried it himself. "I'm looking for Elena?" he asked, brushing wet hair off his forehead. That was the beginning. Our courtship was simple and beautiful. Julian Sterling was the heir to a logistics and shipping firm that had been in his family for 4 generations. He was used to women who wore diamonds to lunch and spoke in coded social climbing. He fell in love with me because I was the opposite of him. We ate Thai takeout on my fire escape. We walked through the park in the snow. I wore thrifted sweaters and comfortable boots. I never asked him for a dime. In fact, I insisted on splitting every check, much to his confusion. "You don't have to," he would say, looking at my scuffed wallet. "I can take care of it." "I know you can," I'd reply, smiling, "but I like taking care of myself." He didn't know that the credit card inside that scuffed wallet had a limit higher than the GDP of a small country. He just saw a girl who was proud of her independence. He loved that about me, or so I thought. The trouble began the moment he decided to introduce me to his family. The Sterling estate was an hour outside the city, a sprawling manor behind iron gates. As we drove up the gravel driveway, I felt Julian's hand tighten on the steering wheel. "Just be yourself," he said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than me. "But maybe don't mention the community center right away. Mother prefers more traditional careers." "Julian," I said gently, placing my hand over his, I am who I am. When we walked into the foyer, the air smelled of beeswax polish and stale lilies. Vivian Sterling descended the grand staircase as if she were royalty, greeting peasants. She was a striking woman, elegant and sharp, wearing pearls that were undoubtedly real but looked heavy enough to choke her. She didn't hug me. She didn't shake my hand. She extended a manicured hand for me to inspect, as if I were expected to kiss the ring. So, she said, her eyes scanning me from my plain brown boots to my messy bun. This is the independent woman Julian has told us so much about. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Sterling, I said politely. Please, she waved a hand dismissively. Mrs. Sterling is my mother-in-law. Call me Vivian. We're informal here. It was a lie. Nothing about that house was informal. Over the next 6 months, as Julian and I got engaged, the informality turned into a campaign of subtle psychological warfare. It started small. At my first holiday dinner, she sat me next to the kitchen door, so I was hit with the swinging door every time a server came out. When I admired a painting in the hallway, she appeared behind me and whispered, "It's a reproduction, dear, but I wouldn't expect you to know the difference between art and a poster." When Julian proposed, with a ring he had bought with his own savings, not a family heirloom, because Vivian refused to unlock the vault, she asked to see it. She held my hand, peered at the diamond, and sighed loudly. "Well," she said, dropping my hand, "it's dainty, very appropriate for your station." Took it all. I took it because I loved Julian. I took it because my father raised me to be like a mountain, unmovable regardless of the wind screaming around it. I never complained to Julian. I didn't want to be the wedge that drove him away from his family. But I noticed things. I noticed that despite all their talk of class and legacy, the staff at the manor looked tired and underpaid. The landscaping was starting to look a little ragged at the edges. I noticed that Julian's father, a quiet man named Robert, spent most of his time in his study with the door locked, drinking scotch at 11 a.m. And I noticed the mail. One afternoon, while I was waiting in the hallway for Julian, I saw a stack of envelopes on the entry table. They were marked urgent and final notice. I recognized the logo on the return address. It was a bank that my family's holding company had acquired 3 weeks prior. I didn't touch the mail. I just stood there staring at the red ink. Vivian walked in, saw me looking, and snatched the envelopes up. "Spying," she snapped, her voice low and venomous. "Checking to see how much we're worth? Don't worry, Elena. The prenup will ensure you leave with exactly what you came with. Nothing." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw the fear behind the makeup. She wasn't just mean, she was desperate. "I'm not worried about money, Vivian," I said calmly. She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Of course you are. It's all people like you think about. You think you've won the lottery with my son. But mark my words, you will never belong at this table." That was 3 months before the wedding. Now we are married. I was officially Elena Sterling. And tonight was the annual Sterling anniversary dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration of the family legacy. But the atmosphere in the house had changed. The servants were gone, replaced by a catering company hired just for the night. Robert was sweating. Julian was pale. And Vivian? Vivian was louder, sharper, and more aggressive than ever. She was a cornered animal baring its teeth, and she had decided that tonight, in front of everyone, she was going to make me the scapegoat for all the misery she was feeling. She wanted to break me. She had no idea she was handing me the hammer. The dinner service began with a chilled cucumber soup that tasted faintly of metal. Or maybe that was the tension in the air bleeding into the food. I sat quietly, folding my hands in my lap. I learned a long time ago that when you are the outsider, your silence makes people nervous. They want you to chatter, to fill the void, to prove you belong. When you don't, they start to wonder what you're thinking. Vivian was holding court at the head of the table. She was talking about the legacy of Sterling Logistics. Her voice a little too loud, her laughter a little too sharp. "We're looking at a record quarter," she announced, gesturing with her wine glass. Red wine sloshed dangerously close to the rim. "The expansion into the Pacific Rim is practically done. Just a matter of signing the paperwork." I saw Julian's father, Robert, flinch. He brought his napkin to his mouth, his hand trembling so severely that the heavy silver ring on his pinky finger clicked against his teeth. A man across the table, Mr. Henderson, I think, a banker who had known the family for decades, cleared his throat. "Is that so, Vivian?" Mr. Henderson asked, his tone cautious. "Because the rumors on the street, well, the market has been volatile. I heard the bank was calling in the commercial loans on the warehouse district." The room went quiet again. That deadly silence. Vivian's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went flat. "Rumors?" she spat the word out like a pit. Vultures circling Frank. You know how it is. People love to see giants stumble. But we aren't stumbling. We are merely restructuring. I looked at Julian. He was staring at his plate, pushing a piece of bread around in a circle. He knew they were lying. He knew the loans weren't just being called in. They were already in default. He had told me weeks ago in a moment of vulnerability that his credit cards were being declined. He thought it was a clerical error. I knew it was the beginning of the end. But Vivian couldn't let the moment of weakness stand. She needed a distraction. She needed a target. Her eyes snapped to me. Of course, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Restructuring is a complex concept. Elena, dear, I don't expect you to follow along. In your world, finance is probably deciding which generic brand of cereal to buy, isn't it? A few guests chuckled nervously. They were relieved the target wasn't them. Actually, I said, keeping my voice level, I find finance fascinating. It's all about leverage, isn't it? Understanding who holds the debt and who holds the asset. Vivian blinked. She hadn't expected me to speak. Leverage, she mocked. Listen to her. She learns a new word and thinks she can sit at the adults' table. Tell me, Elena, did you learn about leverage when you were hunting for a husband? Is that how you secured Julian? By leveraging your assets. The insult was so crude, so open that even the catering staff paused in the corner. Mother, Julian hissed, finally looking up. Stop it. Why should I stop? Vivian slammed her hand on the table. The cutlery rattled. We are all thinking it. Everyone at this table knows it. She didn't marry you for love, Julian. Look at her. She's a mouse. A little brown mouse who crawled into a palace and thinks she's a queen because she trapped a prince. She turned her glare on me, her face twisted with a mixture of rage and panic. You're a gold digger, Lena. Pure and simple. You saw a weak boy with a big inheritance and you sank your claws in. You think you've won the jackpot. You think you're set for life. She leaned forward, her whisper screaming across the room. But let me tell you something. You will never be one of us. And I will make sure you never see a penny of the sterling fortune. I'd rather burn this company to the ground than let a peasant like you inherit it. My heart hammered against my ribs, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. It was the feeling of watching a car crash in slow motion and knowing you are the only one wearing a seatbelt. I looked at Julian, waiting and waiting for him to stand up, waiting for him to tell her to leave or to take my hand and walk out. He looked at his mother. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wet, filled with apology. Elena, he whispered, maybe you should wait in the car? Just until she calms down. Something broke inside me then. It wasn't a loud break. It was the quiet snap of a tether being cut. I realized then that love wasn't enough. Julian was a good man, but he was a weak one. He would never choose me over the monster who raised him. He would let me be humiliated to save himself the discomfort of a fight. I took a deep breath. The smell of the roast lamb was suddenly nauseating. No, Julian, I said. My voice was steady, more unmistakable than it had ever been. I don't think I will. Vivian laughed. You refuse? You think you have power here? You have nothing. You are nothing. At that exact second, my phone vibrated against my thigh. One long, sustained buzz. It was the signal. I reached into my pocket. Put that away. Vivian shrieked. Have you no manners? We are at dinner. I ignored her. I pulled out the phone and unlocked the screen. There was one email notification at the top. Subject: Acquisition complete, Sterling Logistics debt transfer. From Blackwood Holdings Group. CEO, East Blackwood. I read the first line. The transfer of all outstanding liabilities and controlling equity shares of Sterling Logistics is complete. As of 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Blackwood Holdings is the sole owner of all assets. I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. It was a smile my father would have recognized. It was the smile of the checkmate. Vivian was still ranting. Disrespectful common trash. When I am done with you, you'll be back in that gutter you crawled out of. Vivian, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. There was a tone in my voice that I had never used in this house before. It was the CEO's tone, the tone of the person who signs the checks. The table went silent. Even Vivian stopped, her mouth hanging open mid-insult. I think there is something you should know, I said, placing the phone on the table, screen facing down. I don't care what you think, she sneered, reaching for her wine again. You should, I replied, because you were right about one thing. I am interested in finance, specifically in distressed assets. I looked around the table. You see, everyone here knows the Sterling Company is bankrupt, Vivian. Mr. Henderson knows. The catering staff probably knows because their check is going to bounce. And Julian certainly knows. Shut up, Vivian screamed, standing up. Her chair scraped violently against the floor. Get out of my house. That's the thing, I said, remaining seated. I picked up my spoon, twirling it gently. It's not your house anymore. Vivian froze. What? The commercial loans? I continued as if discussing the weather. The ones Mr. Henderson mentioned. They were bundled and sold 3 weeks ago. The bank wanted them off their books because they were toxic. High risk. No collateral left. So, Vivian's hands were shaking. Some other bank bought them. We will negotiate. We always negotiate. No, I said. A private holding company bought them. They bought the debt. They bought the mortgage on this estate. And as of 5 minutes ago, they executed the clause to convert that debt into 100% equity ownership of the company due to non-payment. Who? Robert asked. It was the first time he had spoken clearly all night. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. Who bought the debt, Elena? I looked at my father-in-law. I looked at my husband, who was as pale as a sheet. And then I looked at Vivian, the woman who had just called me a peasant. My family, I said. Your family. Vivian laughed, a hysterical, breathless sound. Your family? The mechanic? The waitress? What did they do? Pool their tips. My mother's maiden name is Blackwood, I said. The silence that followed that name was different. It wasn't awkward. It was the silence of a bomb going off. In that split second before the shockwave hits you. Mr. Henderson dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against his plate. Blackwood, he choked out. As in, Blackwood International, the private equity firm. Yes, I said. My father is Thomas Blackwood. I am his only daughter, Elena Blackwood. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my dress. And you called me a gold digger, Vivian, but it seems I'm actually your landlord. For a solid 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. It was a slow, heavy thud-thud-thud that sounded like a gavel coming down over and over again. Then Vivian laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the wet, ragged sound of something tearing. A Blackwood, she scoffed, her voice climbing an octave. You expect me to believe that? In your discount department store dress? You're delusional. Julian, call the police. She's lost her mind. She looked around the table, seeking allies, desperate for someone to join her in the mockery. But no one laughed. The guests were frozen. They were sharks, and they knew the smell of blood in the water. They knew who the Blackwoods were. If I were telling the truth, laughing at me would be social suicide. I'm not lying, Vivian, I said, my voice dropping to that quiet register that forces people to lean in. And I don't need the police. I have the deed. I slid my phone across the polished mahogany. It spun slowly, coming to a stop right in front of Robert. My father-in-law stared at the device as if it were a radioactive isotope. His hands were shaking so severely that he knocked his wine glass over as he reached for it. A dark red stain began to spread across the white linen tablecloth, creeping toward Vivian's plate like a wound. No one moved to clean it up. Robert picked up the phone. He adjusted his reading glasses. He squinted at the screen. I watched his face. I watched the color drain out of it, leaving him a sickly, paste-like gray. He read the email. Then he swiped to the attachment, the PDF of the transfer documents. He scrolled. He stopped. Robert, Vivian demanded, her voice trembling. Tell her she's a fraud. Robert looked up. He didn't look at his wife. He looked at me. And for the first time since I'd met him, there was no fog of alcohol in his eyes. Just pure, unadulterated shock. It's real, he whispered. What? Vivian snapped. It's real, Viv, Robert said, his voice cracking. The seal. The transaction number. It's signed by Thomas Blackwood. And the beneficiary is Elena. He dropped the phone onto the table as if it had burned him. She owns it, Robert said, slumping back in his chair, defeated. She owns the company. She owns the house. She owns the debt. My God, she owns us. Vivian stood there, swaying slightly. The denial was fighting with the reality in her brain, creating a short circuit. He turned to Julian. You knew, she accused him, pointing a shaking finger. You knew she was rich. You hid it from me so you could. I didn't know. Julian stood up, his chair tipping backward and crashing onto the floor. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet, like a child who had just been told Santa Claus was dead. Elena, is it true? All this time? The community center? The Honda? Yes, I said. It's true. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me? We're married. Why would you lie to me? I looked at him and I felt a pang of sorrow. I had loved him. I really had. But looking at him now, standing there while his mother still loomed over him, I realized I had loved a potential version of him. I had loved the man he could have been, not the man he was. I didn't lie, Julian, I said softly. I omitted. I wanted to know if you loved me. Just me. Without the trust fund. Without the connections. I wanted to know if I was enough. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. And tonight, I continued, gesturing to the table, to his mother, to the silence where his defense of me should have been. Tonight, I got my answer. I tried. Julian stammered. No, I said. You didn't. You sat there. You let her call me a gold digger. You let her humiliate me. You were going to send me to the car like a naughty child. I turned my back on him. I couldn't look at him anymore. It hurt too much. I turned to Vivian. She had stopped screaming. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked at the guests, who were all aggressively studying the silverware or checking their watches. Get out, Vivian hissed. It was a low, guttural sound. Get out of my house. I don't care what that paper says. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Security. Wilson, get her out. She gestured wildly toward the doorway where the head of the household staff, Wilson, stood. Wilson had been with the family for 20 years. He had seen how Vivian treated me. He had seen how she treated him. Wilson took one step forward. Vivian smirked. Throw her out on the street. I didn't move. I just looked at Wilson. Wilson, I said calmly, the new ownership agreement includes a complete review of staff salaries. As of tomorrow morning, all household staff wages are increased by 20%, and the backlog of unpaid overtime that the Sterlings have been ignoring for 6 months, it will be paid in full by Friday. Wilson froze. He looked at Vivian, whose face was purple with rage. Then he looked at me. Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood, Wilson said, bowing his head slightly. He stepped back into the shadows. Wilson, Vivian shrieked. You traitor. You're fired. You're all fired. You can't fire him, Vivian, I said, picking up my purse. You don't have the authority. You're a guest here, and not a very polite one. I walked over to the table, retrieved my phone, and looked down at the guest. I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner, I told the room. Please finish the lamb. The chef is excellent, and I've already ensured he's been paid in advance. I looked at Mr. Henderson. Frank, call my father's office on Monday. We'll discuss the restructuring of the board. I assume you'll want to keep your seat. Mr. Henderson nodded vigorously, sweat beading on his forehead. Of course, Elena. Miss Blackwood. Absolutely. I turned to leave. I didn't want to stay for the fireworks. I had lit the fuse and that was enough. But before I could reach the door, I heard the frantic clicking of heels on the hardwood floor. Vivian grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, painful. You can't do this, she whispered, and for the first time, I heard the tears in her voice. You can't just take everything. Where will we go? This is my home. It's been in the family for 100 years. I looked down at her hand on my arm. I didn't pull away. I just looked at it until she let go. It's not your home, Vivian, I said. It was the bank's home. Now it's mine. Please, she begged. It was pathetic. Elena, we're family. The word hung there, twisting in the air. Family. Family. I repeated. 5 minutes ago I was a rodent. I was a gold digger. I was trash. I leaned in close so only she could hear me. You wanted a gold digger, Vivian? Congratulations. You found the gold. Now you have to deal with the digging. I walked out of the dining room. I walked through the foyer, past the grand staircase, past the portraits of dead Sterlings who were probably rolling in their graves. I walked out the front door into the cool night air. My old Honda Civic was parked next to a line of Mercedes and Bentleys. As I reached for my door handle, I heard the front door open behind me. Elena. It was Julian. He was running down the steps, stumbling a little. He looked frantic. I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I took a moment to look at the moon. It was full and bright, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Elena, wait. Julian caught up to me, breathless. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. Don't, I said. You can't just leave, he pleaded. We need to talk. My parents. My mother is having a panic attack. My father is. I don't even know. You have to come back inside. You have to fix this. I turned to face him. He looked so young then. So helpless. Fix it, I asked. Julian, I just saved your family from bankruptcy. I paid off debts that would have sent your father to prison for fraud. I did fix it, but you humiliated us, he shouted, in front of everyone. No, I corrected him. I told the truth. The humiliation came from the lies you've been living. I just turned on the lights. So what happens now? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Are you divorcing me? I looked at the ring on my finger, the small, modest diamond he had bought with his own money, the one thing that had been real. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm not staying here tonight. I'm going back to my apartment, to the city. The apartment with the creaky floorboards? He asked bitterly. Or do you have a penthouse I don't know about? The apartment, I said, because that's where I live. That's where we live. I opened the car door. Julian, I said, looking at him one last time. You have a choice to make. You can stay in that house, in the museum of failures your mother built, and protect her ego. Or you can come with me, right now, in this car. He looked at the house. He could hear his mother's voice screaming from the open doorway. He looked at the comfortable life he had always known, even as it was crumbling. Then he looked at me in the old Honda. I waited. I counted to 10 in my head. 1, 2, 3. He took a step toward the car. Hope flared in my chest, but then Vivian appeared in the doorway. "Julian," she shrieked. "Get back in here. Don't you dare leave with that woman." Julian froze. His foot hovered above the gravel. He looked at his mother. He looked at me. His face crumpled. I can't leave her like this, Elena," he whispered. "She's my mother." I nodded slowly. It was the answer I expected, but it still hurt like a knife to the gut. "Goodbye, Julian," I said. I got into the car. I started the engine. It sputtered a little, then roared to life. I backed out of the driveway, tires crunching on the gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw Julian standing alone in the dark, caught between the mansion and the exit, paralyzed by his own cowardice. I didn't cry until I hit the highway. Then I cried for 10 miles. But by the time I saw the city skyline, glittering like a promise in the distance, my eyes were dry. The dinner was over, but the real work was beginning. The next morning, the sun rose over the city just like it always did. It didn't care that the Sterling dynasty had collapsed over a bowl of cucumber soup, but the rest of the town certainly cared. By 8 a.m., my phone was vibrating so constantly it almost fell off my nightstand. The news had broken. Not the gossip rag news, but the financial news. The Wall Street Journal had a small sidebar. Blackwood Holdings acquires distressed Sterling assets. But the society blogs, they were screaming. Someone from the dinner party had talked, probably Mr. Henderson. Cinderella was actually the landlord. The Sterling dinner shop. I didn't answer the calls. I didn't answer the texts from Julian, 34 of them ranging from, "Please pick up," to "My mother is hysterical," to "I love you." I got dressed. I didn't put on my charity worker clothes. I put on a tailored navy suit, heels that clicked with authority, and the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. I drove to the Blackwood headquarters, a glass tower downtown that Vivian had probably walked past 1,000 times without knowing who built it. My father was waiting in his office. He was looking out the window, a cup of coffee in his hand. He turned when I walked in. He didn't smile, but his eyes were warm. "Rough night?" he asked. "Expensive night," I replied, sitting down. "The restructuring team is ready," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "The Sterling board is convening at 10 a.m. They're expecting a representative from Blackwood. They don't know it's you yet." "Good," I said. "I want to see their faces." Driving to the Sterling Logistics headquarters felt surreal. I had visited Julian there for lunch a few times. I used to sign in at the front desk as guest. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Sarah, would always wave me through. Today when I walked in, the atmosphere was like a funeral home. People were whispering in huddles. They knew the company had been sold. They were terrified for their jobs. Sarah looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Oh, Elena, thank God. Have you heard? Julian is... Everyone is saying we're all getting fired." I leaned over the desk. "Sarah, no one is getting fired. Not the staff. Tell everyone. The new owners aren't here to strip the company. They're here to save it." She blinked. How do you know?" "Because I'm the new owner," I said. I left, her jaw dropped, and walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the top floor, the executive suite. When the elevator doors opened, I walked straight into the boardroom. They were all there. Robert sat at the head of the table, looking 10 years older than he had on Saturday. Julian was to his right, head in his hands. Mr. Henderson was there, along with 3 other board members I recognized from the wedding. They all looked up when the door opened. "Elena." Julian stood up, confusion washing over his face. "What are you doing here? You can't be here. This is a closed meeting for the new ownership." I didn't answer him. I walked to the head of the table. Robert looked at me, and then slowly, painfully, he stood up. He understood. He moved to the side, leaving the chairman's chair empty. I sat down. "Sit down, Julian," I said. He sat. "Gentlemen," I began, opening my folder. "As you know, Blackwood Holdings now owns 100% of the debt and 51% of the equity in this company. Effectively, I am the decision maker." The silence was heavy, but it wasn't the awkward silence of the dinner party. It was the silence of submission. "Here is the reality," I said, my voice echoing in the room. "This company has been mismanaged for a decade. You have been leveraging assets to fund personal lifestyles. You have been underpaying staff while renovating summer homes. That ends today." I looked at Mr. Henderson. "Frank, we are auditing the books going back 5 years. If we find any irregularities in how those loans were structured, we will be contacting the SEC." Frank went pale. That won't be necessary, Ms. Blackwood." "We'll see," I said. Then I turned to Robert. "Robert, your salary as CEO is $3 million a year. The company lost $4 million last year. As of this moment, you are relieved of your duties. We are offering you an early retirement package. It is generous considering the circumstances. It will be enough to live on comfortably, but not lavishly. Robert nodded, tears welling in his eyes. He didn't fight. He was just tired. Thank you, Elena, he whispered. Thank you for not putting me in jail. Then I turned to Julian. He was staring at me like I was a stranger. And me? He asked, his voice trembling. Am I fired? I looked at my husband, the man I had shared a bed with, the man who had let his mother call me a peasant. No, Julian, I said. You're not fired. You're good at logistics. You know the routes. You know the drivers. Hope sparked in his eyes. But, I continued, you are no longer the vice president of operations. You don't have the experience and frankly, you don't have the backbone for leadership yet. I slid a paper toward him. There is an opening for a regional manager in the distribution center in Ohio. It pays a fair salary. You'll be managing the trucks, ensuring the schedules are met. It's real work, Julian. Hard work. Ohio, he gasped. You're sending me to Ohio? I'm offering you a job, I corrected him. Take it or leave it. But the vice president's office is being converted into a break room for the staff. Julian looked at the paper. He looked at his father who was staring at the floor. He realized in that moment that the safety net was gone. I'll take it, he whispered. The business part was easy. Numbers don't have feelings. They don't cry. They don't beg. The personal part was more challenging. 2 days later, I went back to the Sterling estate. I had to. I now legally own it, and we needed to settle the property's disposition. The gates were open. The lawn looked the same, but the house felt different, felt hunkered. I found Vivian in the sitting room. He was packing. Boxes were everywhere. She was wrapping a porcelain vase in newspaper. She looked up when I entered. She looked smaller. The venom was gone, replaced by a hollow, bitter resignation. Here to gloat? She asked, not meeting my eyes. No, I said, here to inspect the property. She let out a sharp breath. We're leaving. Robert found a condo in the city. A 2-bedroom. Can you imagine? A 2-bedroom. It sounds manageable, I said. Easier to clean. She stopped wrapping the vase and looked at me. I hate you, she said quietly. You know that, don't you? You stole my son. You stole my life. I walked over to the window and looked out at the gardens. I didn't steal anything, Vivian, I said, turning back to her. I bought what you threw away. You treated people like they were disposable. You treated me like I was dirt. You thought your money made you untouchable. But money is just paper. Character is what protects you. And you have no protection left. She didn't answer. She just went back to wrapping the vase, her hands shaking. I walked out of that room and didn't look back. I put the house on the market the following week. I didn't want it. It was too full of ghosts. I used the proceeds from the sale to pay off the remaining creditors and set up a scholarship fund for the children of the Sterling Logistics employees. Julian moved to Ohio. We filed for divorce a month later. It was uncontested. He didn't ask for alimony. In the end, he finally found a shred of dignity. I didn't see him for a year. When I finally did, it was at a coffee shop near the old community center where we first met. I was there meeting a friend. He walked in. He looked different. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked tired but solid. He wasn't floating anymore. He saw me. He hesitated, then walked over. Elena, he said. Julian. I nodded. I hear the company is doing well, he said. Profits are up. They are, I said. The staff is happy. He looked down at his shoes. I'm doing okay in Ohio. The team there, they're good people. I'm learning a lot. I'm glad to hear that, I said sincerely. He looked at me and his eyes were sad but clear. I'm sorry, he said. I never said it properly. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. I'm sorry I was weak. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I was too afraid of my mother to keep you. I looked at him and I felt the final knot in my chest loosen. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was peace. Thank you for saying that, Julian, I said. I hope you find what you're looking for. I think I'm starting to, he said. He walked away. I watched him go. I didn't want him back. I had grown too much and my life was complete. I had my work. I had my family. I had my dignity. I drank my coffee. It tasted better than any vintage wine Vivian had ever served. I still drive by that community center sometimes. It reminds me of the girl I was, the one who thought love could conquer anything, even a fortress of old money and older prejudices. I learned a hard lesson that night at the dinner table. I knew that some people would never see your worth, no matter how much you shine, because their own insecurity blinds them. Vivian didn't hate me because I was poor. She hated me because I was free. She was a prisoner of her own image, terrified that without the walls of that estate she would disappear. But I also learned something about power. True power isn't screaming at servers or buying things you can't afford to impress people you don't like. True power is silence. It's the quiet confidence of knowing who you are, what you are capable of, and having the discipline to wait for the right moment to show it. Julian is rebuilding his life one shift at a time. I wish him well. I really do. Everyone deserves a chance to grow up, even if they start a little late. As for me, I'm still Elena. I still volunteer on Tuesdays. I still drive my Honda when the weather is bad. But now when I sit at a table, I never worry if I belong there. I know that the only seat that matters is the one you build for yourself. So I want to ask you something. We've all been in situations where someone made us feel small. Someone made us feel like we didn't belong. What would you have done? Would you have walked away and let them keep their illusions? Or would you have stayed, pulled out your phone, and shown them exactly who owned the roof over their heads? Sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting. Sometimes it's just buying the bank. Let me know in the comments below. And remember, never judge a book by its cover, or a guest by their handbag. You never know who might be holding the deed. Until next time.